Sorry, I forgot to start the recording of the video. So in Janmashtami Narayan, he shows the lila of Krishna, performs some lila in Vaikuntha, but everyone is aware this is a drama. But the inhabitants will be tasting that Madhurya, being fully aware this is God playing the drama. But the point again is Brajavasis are not aware of this. They don't have this idea Krishna is God. This will be clear in next meetings, next verses. That comes to the fore in Gaur Lila, for example, when that knowledge is required. And that shows that Aishwarya was there. All the inhabitants of Braj seem to be totally ignorant of Krishna's divinity. And for example, when this village girl like Rupa Manjari comes to the world in the context of Gaur Lila's Rupa Goswami, how much knowledge do they have? How much don't they know? They wrote all these Bhakti Shastras. But that knowledge is taking a form here in the context of dissemination of the messages and instructing others. But in Vrindavan, that's not necessary. Srila Maharaj will give often the example of the United States. He will give at that time, he said, the United States is the most powerful and militarized country in the world, but you don't see tanks and guns at every corner of the streets and so on, because that will create some disturbance in the daily affairs. But if some enemy attacks the country, all such weaponry will come. It's there, but it's not appearing because it will disturb the healthy daily interaction. So in the same way, in Vrindavan, all that weaponry, if you will, all that Aishwarya, knowledge of Krishna, Godhood, and so on, is there, but it's not appearing because the nature of the Lila do not require that. That will be disturbing. But when that's required, like in the Gaur Lila, so much knowledge is there. So in this way, different experiences of the Madhurya, the Sri Sampradayas we mentioned, their Sthayi Bhav will be Aishwarya for Narayan. And so this Madhurya related to Krishna will be some form of Sanchari Bhav, if you will, some transitory emotion that comes, but will increase their Aishwarya feeling towards Narayan. So that's very different experience of Madhurya than the one of the Brajavasis. So this type of Madhurya is the exclusive experience of Vrindavan. In other places like Vaikuntha, for example, Madhurya won't choose to manifest there. So Bhagavan can relish Aishwarya, full, pure, if you will, unmixed Aishwarya rasa. So because Bhagavan, again, he wants to relish different tastes. So in Vaikuntha, he's only relishing Aishwarya without any admixture of Madhurya, and some Madhurya may be in the context that as I mentioned. But Bhagavan in Vaikuntha is relishing Aishwarya only, not so much because Madhurya is predominated by Aishwarya. You follow? But because Madhurya is not necessary for that particular lila, for that particular relishment. But the highest experience that includes the highest degree of Madhurya and Aishwarya is found in Vrindavan. So that's the point that Vishwanath wants to make. So after describing here Madhurya, now he will give in today's first verse, we will see verse 4, he will give a definition of Aishwarya, a definition of majesty. So I will share the verse with all of you in the chat. So there's the verse, I'll read it. It says, definition of Aishwarya, that manifestation of God which does not depend on human-like feelings and only reveals majestic divine manifestations is called Aishwarya. When Krishna showed such Aishwarya to his parents, Vasudeva and Devaki, he told them, Srimad Bhagavatam 10.3.44, I showed you this four-armed form of mine so that you can remember your previous birth. Simply by seeing me as a human child, you will not get this realization. In the same way, Sri Krishna told Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita 9.5, behold my majestic form, and showed him his Aishwarya. In Braj also, even while displaying the glories of his charming beauty, he showed Brahma thousands upon thousands of his four-armed forms. So now we are turning from the definition of Madhurya given in the previous section to the definition of Aishwarya. So Vishwanath, again, he's pounding the post and making his case for the supremacy of Braja Lila, Braja Prem, which is the goal of Raga Bhakti. Try to keep this in mind because that's the context of the whole discussion. So, so here Vishwanath starts to define the characteristics of Krishna's Aishwarya in the context again of the personality of Krishna. Now, all these examples are connected to Krishna, with Arjuna, with Vasudeva and Devaki, with Brahma. So trying to get at close to the Aishwarya is present in Krishna. So how to understand that Aishwarya present in Krishna when he is in Braj? In the dynamics of the Brajavasi, gradually, Vishwanath is trying to secure our proper understanding of all this. So here, Vishwanath is given example from different well-known sections from Shastra. First of all, Vasudeva and Devaki, Mathura, an example connected to Vatsalya, an example which when Krishna shows to them Chaturbhuj, the four-armed forms like Narayan to them when he's being born in Kamsa's prison. Then the second example will be Arjuna in Kurukshetra, which is an example connected to Sakya, particular form of Sakya, the one that Arjuna has. And in this case, Krishna will show to him Vishwarup, universal form in the battlefield. And last but not least, the example that he is being given is Brahma in Vrindavan, which Brahma is someone who aspired for Sakya, but here is mainly connected to Dasya in the beginning. He has more that mood, although he will like to project into Sakya Bhav. And here the darshan he will receive is a multi-Narayan group, if you will, form. So let's analyze the three of them briefly. So first of all, the first example is Vasudev, mainly. So when Vasudev, Krishna was born, remember, Krishna is born from Jashoda and Nanda and Vrindavan, the original Krishna, Braj Krishna. So from Devaki and Vasudev, an expansion of the original Krishna is born, an expansion of Swayam Bhagavan, Vasudev Krishna called. So when he was born in the prison house of Kamsa, from Vasudeva and Devaki, the point is he appeared there in full Aishwarya. We are speaking about Aishwarya here. So here Vishwanath will give some examples of how Krishna appeared to them, and we will see in the next verse he will give examples of how the devotees who behold such appearance will react. So he appeared in full Aishwarya, again with 4 arms, Chaturbhuj, holding a conch, a disc, a club, a lotus flower, with all different ornaments that correspond with that particular feature of the absolute called God, if you will. So the idea here is that in this way there will be no doubt at all that God appeared as the son of Vasudeva and Devaki. We will see why Krishna wanted to assure them, I am God. And of course, the result of that, they will be offering reverential prayers to Sri Hari, being aware of his godhood. Vasudeva and Devaki, when Krishna appears in the prison house, they are fully acknowledging the fact that he is not our son, he is God. So Vasudeva and Devaki, they live in Mathura, not in Vrindavan. So as we already explained, there are different degrees of love in Golok. Golok Dwarka, Golok Mathura, Golok Vrindavan, even in Golok Vrindavan, different sections. So this has to do to the different proportions in which Aishwarya and Madhurya are prominent there. So in Mathura, there's a prominence of Madhurya, but there is some Aishwarya there. So this is shown here. Vasudeva and Devaki, their bhav is like a mixture of Brajavav, Madhurya, the intimacy of Braj, but Aishwarya. In which sense they have Aishwarya? In the sense that their bhav, their intimacy towards Krishna becomes affected in connection to certain Aishwarya. Like, not always, not at every single moment, of course, but in certain moments, occasionally, like this case. Krishna is showing himself as God, and their Vatsalya Prem becomes affected. So the particular context here, of course, is that Bhagavan is appearing to them and he is confirming to them his connection with them from previous lifetimes even. So that's an important point he wanted to make to them by showing himself as, I'm God, here I am. And he told them, in your previous birth, of course, remember, we are speaking about eternal associates of Bhagavan, but also they appear in different manifestations according to different divine descents of Bhagavan as well. That's why we hear sometimes Nanda and Yashoda being drawn and Dhara in previous births, but actually they were always Nanda and Yashoda, and these refer to expansions of them here and there. So Bhagavan is telling to Vasudeva and Devaki here, no? In your previous birth, you, Vasudeva, had been Sutapa, Prajapati called Sutapa, and Devaki, you have been his wife called Prishni, and Prishni is Sutapa. And you performed severe tapasya for thousands of celestial years, and your purpose in such a penance was to please me, Krishna was saying. So I was pleased with your tapasya and offered you a boon, and you prayed to me like, may we have a son like you, a son exactly, a child exactly like you. But the point is that for them there was no one else like me, and actually there's no one else like me, Krishna says. There's no point of comparison. You cannot compare Krishna with someone else. That's the point. Like, for example, when Sri Krishna also, he's in Purvarag before meeting with Sri Radha in the unfolding of the earthly Leela, and he is crying, and Subal comes to him, and Subal sees him cry, says, "Why are you crying, my dear friend?" And Krishna takes Subal's hand and puts in his heart, and Subal's hand feels Krishna's heart, and some tears fall from Krishna's face to Subal's hand. And Subal says, "What's going on?" And Krishna starts to express, "I don't know, I have seen this girl and I have tried to forget her, but I cannot get her out of my mind, but I don't know who she is." And Subal starts to, "But tell me something about her. She's like what? She can compare with whom?" And Krishna says, I mean, she only can be compared with herself only. There's no one else to be compared to, no? Sri Radha, of course. So in this same way, here, Krishna and Sutapa are asking Krishna, a son like you, but actually a son like you will mean you, because there's no one like you. So because of this, and Krishna himself accepted, yes, that's a good conclusion. So I will become your son. No, not someone else similar like me, because there's no someone like me. So I will become your son. So he becomes their son as Prishni and Sutapa in the form of Prishni Garbha. And in the second birth, in the next birth, again, Prishni and Sutapa were born as Aditi and Kasyapa. So the Lord became their son named Upendra. And eventually, in the third birth, if you will, in this series, he, in his form as Krishna, he is confirming. He wants to make clear to them, one more time, I have descended as your son. I have appeared. So because of that, I'm appearing before you like this to confirm this fact. Because if I had just appeared as an ordinary child, maybe you will not be able to fully understand my godhood, my divinity, that I have descended to fulfill my promise to you. So again, in this lila, Krishna appearing in this way to Vasudeva and Devaki, there's exclusive display of majesty. There's not any tinge of Madhurya. Everyone is fully aware. I'm God. Krishna is speaking about previous lifetimes that has to do with Sarvagnyata, omniscience. So this is called Aishwarya proper. There's no Madhurya, Aishwarya. So we see not only Vishnu and Vaikuntha can show that, Krishna himself can show exclusive Aishwarya in this context. So that's the first example given here by Vishwanath. The second example he's given is the one of Arjuna. So after giving the example of Aishwarya being expressed in the context of Vatsalya Rasa with Vasudeva and Devaki, now he is speaking about Aishwarya in the context of Sakya, by speaking of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is narrating to Arjuna the 10th chapter of the Gita, Vibhuti Yoga. He's describing to Krishna all his opulences. No? From the intelligent, I'm the intelligent. From the strong, I'm the strength. From this, I'm this. From this, I'm its best possible manifestation, and so on. So Arjuna becomes curious, and he wants to have a glimpse of those opulence on location in front of his eye. He would like to contemplate those very vibhutis. So he requests this to Krishna, please show that to me. Not only speak about that to me, but show that particular form that includes all these opulences. So of course, here we are turning towards Aishwarya, even though Arjuna has a relationship of certain type of Sakya with Krishna. So Arjuna is asking to Krishna, show me this opulence. And what does Krishna reply in the 11th chapter of the Gita, 8th verse in the Vishvarup? Before showing the Vishvarup, the universal form, he said, Arjuna, with these eyes that you have now, you cannot see this form that you are requesting to me. So therefore I will give you Divya Chakshu, divine eyes, through which you can behold my mystic opulence, my Aishwarya. So this is an important point that the Acharyas made in their commentaries to this verse. That is that Arjuna, on one side, he's Nitya Parikar, an eternal associate of Bhagavan, a friend, not an ordinary man bound by Maya who has ordinary eyes and who needs some extra eyes to Sri Krishna. So the point is the eyes that through which Arjuna is eternally, daily relishing Krishna's form and sweetness were not ordinary eyes. No? His friendship is called Puri Sambandhi, which means he's a friend, a city friend, basically. He's not a friend like Subal Sridham, a village forest friend. He lives in another section, as we know. He appears in Hastinapur in the Leela here, and so on. So it's another type of Sakya. But there is some sweetness, there is some intimacy there as a friend will have. But he's asking now, Krishna, show me your majestic universal form. So that requires another eye. So what's the point here of Krishna saying to Arjuna, I will give you Divya Chakshu, divine eyes, through which you can behold my majestic form? Well, the point is that Arjuna could not have behold this majestic form with his elevated eyes. The majestic form was a lower form, if you will. The Aishwarya predominated like form was a lower form than the sweet friend-like form that Arjuna was relishing daily with his eyes in particular, with his Sakya eyes. And Anantadas Pandit gives example in this connection that just as a tongue becomes accustomed to relishing the best sandesh, these milk sweets, and that tongue can never eat again plain brown sugar, not for a single moment, unless one has a new tongue, if you will. So similarly, here Bhagavan is giving Arjuna inferior eyes, even though they are called divine eyes. Divine in one sense, basically. Divine in the sense that they can perceive Krishna's godhood, Krishna's divinity. So he could be able to behold such a form. That's the point. Because the revelation of Aishwarya, that's what he was asking for. He was asking Krishna for a revelation of majesty that has nothing to do with any kind of human feelings, with any kinds of intimacy, as you know, the Vishwarup. In the next verse, we will see how Arjuna reacted to that. But in general terms, we know the Sakya, Arjuna's Sakya, similar to Vasudeva's Vatsalya, receded to the background when contemplating the Chaturbhuj in the case of Vasudeva, the Vishwarup in the case of Arjuna, as we will see in the next verse. So we see that love of affection, at least certain type of love, like the ones of Vasudeva, Devaki, and Arjuna will say, sometimes they say, is always shy before Aishwarya Gyan. That type of love in the face of Aishwarya Gyan recedes to the background. Shrunk, I think you say in English. So, before we go into the next verse, we have one more example that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is sharing in this fourth section, fourth verse or prose. And that's a famous example of Brahma, in Vrindavan in this case, interestingly. No, not in Mathura, not in Kurukshetra, but in Vrindavan, Brahma Vimohan Lila. But as you know, in the Brahma Vimohan Lila, the Brajavasis are not seeing the display of majesty that Krishna will show to Brahma. Except for Balaram, that on one level starts to not seeing the full Aishwarya he shows to Brahma, but hints all that, starts to have some suspect about what's going on. And he was bewildered, as we told in the previous class, because of that. So as you know, Brahma wanted to see the sweet glories of Krishna in Braj. He asked Krishna for prospect of Sakya in the beginning of creation, and eventually he had the chance to have a glimpse of what's going on in Krishna's daily picnic lunch with the Gopas and so on after killing Agasur. So, but there was some problem between, and Brahma was confused, as you know. He was like misunderstanding Krishna Lila. He was misunderstanding the simplicity, informality, and depth of that love. So Krishna wanted to secure Brahma's proper understanding and promote him in due course to his desired goal. So to show him these glories properly, because Brahma said, I want to see the glories of Raj. Okay, so you need to appreciate it's at Aishwarya on a foundational level. So that's why he showed Brahma eventually thousands upon thousands of uh, Narayans. Not only Chaturbhuj, but Sahasra Chaturbhuj, thousands of of four-arm forms, thousands of multi-Narayan darshan. Remember, Vishwanath quoted this Brahma Vimohan Lila before when he was speaking about the Madhurya section, the intimacy, from one particular angle, and now he's quoting it again, Brahma Vimohan Lila, but in connection to the greatest degree of Aishwarya that we can possibly find in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Guru Maharaj makes that point constantly. You cannot find greater Aishwarya than that one. Not only Krishna showing Narayan, but thousands of Narayans and directly coming from Krishna. With that, Krishna showing to Brahma, I'm the source of Narayan. Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. This is the moment, the main moment in the Krishna Lila at this point is clearly presented. Krishna is the supreme personality of God and the fountainhead of all aspects of divinity. So as you know, Krishna, Brahma tried to kidnap the calves, tried to kidnap the gopas, and eventually Krishna expanded himself as each one of them, knowing how much he knew them. And this happened for a whole year, and all the cows were having a special affection for their children, their calves, which were actually Krishna, similar to the mothers and fathers of Vrindavan. All of them wanted to have Krishna as their son, so Krishna was fulfilling their desire. So after all this year, which was a moment in Brahma's time, if you will, Brahma came back and he started to see what's going on. Everything seems normal, nothing happened, and he went and saw that the calves and cows that he kidnapped were still in the cave. He thought there were, but they were here and at the same time, so his forehead started to spin, and eventually Krishna gave this darshan to Brahma. From every calf, from every friend, that was his own expansion, Krishna showed himself as Narayan, to make a point to Brahma again, showing how unlimited Vishnus were expanding from his own expanded forms as cows and calves. And this, he did this to correct Brahma's ordinary vision. Brahma was not properly appreciating, did not have the proper Sambandha Gyan to approach the Braja Lila. So Krishna wanted to purify that conception in Brahma, because he was thinking the Madhurya, when he saw Krishna with the cowherd boys in the picnic, he thought this thing is ordinary. This is like an ordinary picnic. It was Madhurya, but he only saw Madhurya. He didn't see the Aishwarya behind that Madhurya. He only saw this is like any ordinary picnic lunch. So this doesn't have anything to do with my guru, Krishna, who I saw in the beginning of creation. So Krishna wants to correct that point, which is the point that Vishwanath wants to make here. Madhurya has to have Aishwarya in the background for it to be Madhurya proper. So Krishna showed to Brahma, here's the Aishwarya, which is behind. Here's the here's the background of this picnic lunch. Thousands and millions of Narayans. This is the underlying reality of our moments of intimacy with my friends, and putting the sandesh and the pakoras with the left hand and the yogurt. Behind all that are thousands of Narayans, if you will, supporting such Madhurya. And this is a very point that Vishwanath condemned in the previous verse, when he said, Madhurya is not just something simple and ordinary and bewildered, because an ordinary boy can do such a thing, and that's not necessarily Madhurya, as we speak in connection to the Braja Lila. So Brahma was engaging in that mistake. So Krishna was showing to him the underlying Aishwarya to the whole Braja Lila. Even though Braja Lila seems so small, so limited, so uncivilized, and so on. All this, as Guru Maharaj will say, is because there is so much Madhurya, there is so much love, that everything seems so simple and so small, because love represents the biggest place, the biggest space, the biggest location. And as he will give the example, if you're in a cave with your lover, you don't need any other place. But if you're in the Sahara desert alone, it's not enough yet. So Vrindavan seems to be contracted, but actually full expansion is there. So Krishna will show that to Brahman. This is a very important point in the whole Braja Lila, when this principle is shown officially, if you will. Krishna is tu Bhagavan Swayam, Krishna is the source of all manifestation, and how the so-called ordinariness there, the Madhurya, is totally backed by Aishvarya. So, some words regarding this fourth prose, which again is in connection to things that Vishwanath has said, and he will continue elaborating upon. So, let's go now to the fourth prose. I'll share there the section, it's there in the chat. I'll read it for you. So, in this fourth prose, again, Vishwanath will speak about different classes of, he will compare, no? He spoke Aishvarya and how Krishna reacted towards those devotees, and now he will speak about how those devotees like Vasudeva and Arjuna will react themselves to the Aishvarya that Krishna presented, and he will start to present the contrast between them and the Brajavasis. So now we are seeing the first part of verse number 5. This is only one part. This is a long verse. So I think we will speak about this also. Verse 5 we'll be speaking about next class and the other one as well. But in this first part, Vishwanath continues his presentation. So it says like this. Now follows a description of the devotees who are fixed in their conception of Krishna as the Supreme Lord. Aishvarya Gyan Nishta Bhakta. Vasudeva told Sri Krishna and Sri Baladev, "You are not my sons. You are directly the Supreme Personalities of Godhead." Arjuna also, after seeing Krishna's universal form, said, "I had thought that you were my friend and told it to you." The statements of these devotees reveal that their respective parental and fraternal moods diminished upon seeing Sri Krishna's divine opulence. This is called Aishvarya Gyan. Again, Madhurya Gyan is that feeling which does not cause even the slightest feeling of heart-throbbing awe after seeing some display of Krishna's majesty, because feelings of intimacy are already firmly established in the heart. So this first part of verse number 5 includes these two sections. First of all, the reaction of the devotees mentioned in the previous verse, and then the contrast that Vishwanath starts to make about regarding Madhurya, and eventually he will share some other further examples from Vrindavan in this connection. So, in the previous verse, Vishwanath described Bhagavan's display of Aishvarya, as we already mentioned, by giving the three examples of Vasudeva, Arjuna, and Brahma. So now Vishwanath will describe the reaction of some of those devotees mentioned in the previous verse, their reaction to such Aishvarya. When I say Aishvarya, I mean I refer to mainly has to do with their awareness of Krishna's godhood. And of course the corresponding awe and reverence. Sometimes Aishvarya is connected to awe and reverence. But we should understand that awe and reverence will come as a natural result of, first of all, becoming aware he's God. So the natural response to that will be worshiping awe and reverence, certain distance, certain mood, but all that will come from a particular, if you will, sambandha or orientation. Oh, Krishna is God. So as Guru Maharaj will say, if you are in front of God, you will say, "Oh my God." You won't run and just embrace him. Some distance will be established. So from the three examples that were shared in the previous verse, here Vishwanath will share two of them. The two first ones, Vasudeva and Arjuna. So let's analyze them briefly. So in connection to Vasudeva's psychology, here Vishwanath is quoting one line from the Bhagavad when Vasudeva is saying, when Krishna shows again Chaturbhuj, speaking about their previous lifetimes and how he's God and he's coming to fulfill their promise. Vasudeva will say, Vishwanath says here, he says, he was speaking to Krishna and Balaram, even more Aishvarya in part 2. You are not my sons. You are directly the supreme personalities of Godhead. So that's one line, actually, an excerpt of two verses would appear in the Bhagavad, where Vasudeva is saying to Krishna, and Balaram is saying, you are not my sons, you are the supreme lords. Tell me frankly, if you have descended to destroy the miscreant kings and thus lighten the burden of the earth, all friends of the distressed, now we, souls, surrender to you, who are afraid of material existence, have taken shelter at your lotus feet. All this time we have considered you to be just our sons, since we were so engrossed in considering ourselves to be mortal material body through constantly yearning for extremely paltry sense gratification. So you can feel the Ishvarya here, or the awe and reverence, basically, based on the sense of godhood that Vasudeva had. So this is, and naturally, the idea of Vishwanath here is try to compare or contrast this with the Brajavasa's reaction. So that's why in the next section he will immediately invoke the example of Nanda and Jashoda, Krishna's parents in Vrindavan, how they do react to situations like this. And of course that will make even more clear what's their stance, what's their psychology. So we see here Vasudeva is praying to Krishna and Balaram as God. You descended to destroy, paritranaya sadhunam vinasya chaduskritam, to chastise the evil one, dharma samstapanartaya, to reestablish dharma, relieve the earth. Oh, Dinabandhu, we are surrendered to you. Jashoda will never pray like this to Krishna. Nanda Maharaj, nor any of the Brajavasis, they will just laugh if someone suggests even such a thing. That will be clearly explained in the next section. And at the end, Vasudeva shows even some repentance, like, oh, due to my ignorance, I thought you were my sons. I was sorry for that. I was just engrossed in material life, material body, and that's why I kind of extended that projection, human-like, towards you and thought you were my son, but so sorry, I realized you are God. So again, that's a big contrast between Aishwarya and Madhurya. So here we see a clear example of what Aishwarya is. Vasudeva's paternal feelings for Krishna as a son were totally replaced by an intense feeling of awe and reverence for him as Ishvara, as God, full acknowledgement, you are God. So a similar example that was in connection to Vatsalya Bhava, as we know, and the Chaturbhuj that Krishna showed to Vasudeva and Devaki. Vishwanath then gives another example, the one of Arjuna in Sakya Bhava, when beholding finally the Vishwarup. And again, all this is a comparison. Eventually he will give example of Vatsalya in Braj, Sakya in Braj, and other rasas as well, the gopis in connection to the Brajavasis. So going back to Arjuna and the Bhagavad Gita and the 11th chapter, the Virat Rupa Darshan, where Krishna is showing universal form. As Arjuna asked for that, Krishna gave him, as we say, divine eyes, if you will, heavenly vision to behold such a particular lower manifestation compared to Arjuna's daily standard. And when Arjuna saw such a form, you may recall how this is described as having no beginning, no end, thousands of arms, thousands of heads, of ears, fire, open mouths, so many people entering into those mouths, the Kala Rupa, the time that all devouring time being a part of that universal form. So you can imagine, at least on some level, which was Arjuna's experience there. There was his sense of friendship with Krishna was totally disappearing there. So he started to pray with Krishna, to Krishna full of fear, actually. We see this mainly in verses 41, 42 of this 11th chapter of the Gita. He's praying to Krishna, just begging forgiveness. Oh, my Lord, without being not ignorant of your glory, the glories of your universal form, out of the bewilderment, out of love, I have considered you a mere friend. I have repeatedly addressed you, oh Krishna, Yadava, oh Saketi, oh friend. I have disrespected you while speaking to you in jest, while we were playing or sitting on the same bed or lying down, sometimes in front of our friends, my friends. But of all this, I realize I have been such an aparadi. So for all these offenses, I pray to you, please, forgiveness. Oh, you, unlimited universal form, forgiveness. So again, Brajavasis won't pray like that even when Krishna is lifting Govardhan for 7 days with little finger in front of them for a week. Another psychology. So we need to appreciate the psychology. So from this verse of Arjuna, we can appreciate how his fraternal love was shrunk by an exclusive, intense feeling of reverential love and God consciousness. Krishna is God. Again, Aishwarya. So with all this, Vishwanath is creating a proper contrast. He's making his case, he's unfolding his presentation, and eventually he will now start to turn into the direction of Vrindavan to fully throw us there, if you will. But before doing that, he wants to make this point clear. Aishwarya, the role of Aishwarya, the comparison, the categorically superior position of the Brajalila. But he wants to further emphasize his main point. The Madhurya of Raj is not ordinary. It's fully backed by total, absolute Aishwarya and more. Because again, unless we understand the psychology of the inhabitants of Raj, we won't be able to really go there, to really develop a sense of wanting to be there. And Raganuga Bhakti, again, go back to the make full circle. What does it mean, Raganuga Bhakti? To follow in the footsteps of the Braj inhabitants, to become identified with their psychology. So here, Vishwanath is making a whole psychological analysis of the Braja people by comparing them with another inhabitant from other realms, another pure devotees, different modes, the different levels of combination, Madhurya, Aishwarya, the form of Mugdata, Sarvajnata. So he's gradually, very expertly trying to make this case for us to be properly situated regarding what's Vrindavan, what's Braja Krishna, what does it mean to follow the inhabitants of Braj as a sadhaka, as a Raganuga sadhaka. So try to keep all these ideas tied together, because they are not just like, it's not that Vishwanath just going off and speaking about something totally disconnected from the original topic. It's fully, if make it full circle. We have some remaining verses here, but try to perceive how he's making full circle with his presentation in his Raga-vartma-candrika. So he, in this first part of the 5th verse, he's first of all describing the reaction of these devotees, Vasudev, Arjun, to Krishna's Aishwarya. And after that, he's turning again towards the Madhurya of Braj by mentioning, okay, this is Aishwarya Gyan. No? He wanted to make it clear. Before he described Madhurya, now he's describing Aishwarya from the vantage point of Bhagavan and his devotees. And now he's saying, okay, so going back to Madhurya, what's Madhurya? He's trying to make us remember that feeling which even it's not creating the slightest sense of awe and reverence, even after seeing some of Krishna's majesty, because intimacy is so firmly established in the heart. So he's trying to create this contrast, this opposition. So in direct opposition, if you will, to this Aishwarya that we have just described, that attitude which does not generate any feeling of awe and reverence, even though, that's the point, even though there may be an awareness of he is the Lord, and he will speak about that in the next class. Even if there may be some awareness, Krishna may be God, but even though the feelings, the awe and reverence is not coming at any point, which that's even more startling. If you say, okay, the person doesn't know that he's God, so that's why he's intimate. But if he gets to know he's God, he will be filled with awe and reverence. No, that it doesn't happen. Even if the Brajavasis get to hear about from somewhere, from someone, Krishna is God, or he may be, for them it doesn't change their feelings toward him. But on the contrast, as we'll see, that nourishes their intimacy toward him. So all this is Madhurya. Madhurya Gyan called sometimes, which has nothing to do with ordinary Gyan, but a type of knowing Krishna as my darling friend, beloved, and so on. And of course, the corresponding abode to such love is called Braj. When everything is possible and when everything and everyone has a purely sweet conception of Krishna, purely embedded in this Madhurya. That's what Vrindavan is about. We have to make this clear. That's the psychology that permeates the whole of Raj. So we will see this more in detail in the next verses, where Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur will continue proving, again, not only these points with abundant examples from the Bhagavad and the Brajalila, but also how if the Brajavasis enter in touch with Krishna's Ishvara Gyan, knowledge that he may be God, their intimacy not only becomes effective, but actually increases, as I said, in those moments, instead of becoming diminished. So that's really, I mean, if you stop for a minute and try to contemplate this particular theological possibility, that's unique. And that requires certain explanation for it not to be misunderstood. So even Ishvara Gyan, when I say Ishvara Gyan, this refers to the knowledge of Krishna's Godhood. And this can be understood in two ways. Ishvara Gyan may be understood that one's own realization that Krishna is God, like for example, Vasudeva, Arjuna, they really acknowledge, oh, you are God. Sorry, I thought otherwise at some point. So that's Ishvara Gyan. But also another possibility of Ishvara Gyan connected to the Brajavasi will be what? That you hear from others, Krishna is God, but you don't believe that. That's the case of the Brajavasis. Yeah, you may say Krishna is God, but it cannot be like that. And if you want extreme case, even if it will be like that, that's totally secondary. So that will be clearly shown in the next section of this fifth verse with different examples from the Govardhan Lila and some others. So just to finish and make it a brief recap and go to the Q&A. Let's recap. In other words, when Krishna knows that he is Ishwar, he is the supreme God and controller, and his bhakta acknowledges it, that pastime is called Aishwarya Bhav. Both sides are aware, he's God and Krishna, I'm God. Because it's also from the two sides. That's what Vishwanath showed him. On one side, he analyzed Krishna himself showing to Vasudeva, I'm God, I'm coming to you, in the previous life these, the similar to Arjuna, and then he turned to the vantage point of the devotee. He is God. I'm God, he's God. When the two of them meet, Aishwarya is there, basically. But when both Krishna and his associate forget this fact, and again, even when the idea that Krishna may be God comes, they will still think of him in terms of he's my lover, friend, son. That's Madhurya Bhava. So for us to understand these terms, because sometimes we can translate the terms in one word, English word, sweetness, intimacy, majesty, but all the implications of this one word has so many things inside. So this is Madhurya Bhava. And this is the Krishna we worship. This is the goal of Raga Bhakti, Vrindavan. And in Vrindavan, in Braj, Krishna is always in this bhav. He's always in Braja Bhav, basically. Madhurya Bhav, intimacy, bewilderment, mugdata, totally overwhelmed, as Guru Maharaj will say, by the love of the Brajavasis. And they've been overwhelmed by Krishna's love to them. So overwhelming in two directions, Madhurya and Aishwarya, again, on the background of that, giving all that its proper transcendental status, if you will. So we could say that Madhurya is the main aspect of Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam. He's his Swarup Lakshan, if you will, this intrinsic main attribute. And Aishwarya may be more connected as a Tatastha Lakshan in connection to Krishna, and a secondary accidental element. And that's why Krishna in Vrindavan, he wears peacock feather, he wears the flute, which are like this epitomes of Madhurya. But he goes outside of Raj, he won't be using that, which indicates predominance of some other elements. So all these symbols speak about the degree of emotional experience, if you will, in the absolute. So we'll stop here, and in the next class and the next classes, because again, we won't finish this fifth part in the next lecture. But so in the next section, Vishwanath will continue with elaborating on this, and he will share many examples of this point he wants to make here. He will contrast the Aishvarya-like, if you will, Vatsalya of Vasudeva and Devaki he just presented, and he will again present it in the context of contrasting that with the Vatsalya of Nanda and Jasoda and Braj. And he will contrast the Aishvarya-like, if you will, the Puri Sambandhi Sakya of Arjun with that of the Gopas in Braj. And of course, also he will speak about the Gopis in this connection in many interesting ways as well. So we'll finish here. I don't know if there's any questions, something you would like to ask today. No questions today?
Good morning, Maharaj. Kanaram here.
Jai Kanuram Pranam.
Yes. Jai. So I was reading this morning, Lord Chaitanya is in Jagannath Puri and preparing to travel, wants to travel to South India, and on the pretense of looking for his brother Vishvarup. But there's it's a pretense of ignorance. So there's a blend of Aishvarya and Madhurya there, because there are the people that he's telling that he's going there are people that know, in a sense, that he's God. Sarvabhauma knows. In a sense, Lord Nityananda and others, they sort of know that he's the Lord. So, like, if he's to say, like, I'm going to go look for him, and like, they don't say, well, since you're the Lord, you know precisely where he is and what's happened to him. That would be like an Aishvarya side. But they don't say that. They accept what he says. They accept that he's going to go to South India and look for Vishvarup. So there's I don't know how well these principles of Aishvarya and Madhurya, but I'm sure they apply and translate into Lord Chaitanya's pastime somehow. But can you tell me what you think about that?
Yes, of course. Thank you for asking the question. Yes, the Gaur Lila is, of course, it's an extension of Krishna Lila. At one point, we cannot speak of them as different things, but at the same time, there is some difference, of course. And in the context of certain elements, there is some Aishvarya, overt Aishvarya, as I today mentioned the example of I don't know, Rupa Manjari coming as Rupa Goswami and exhibiting deep knowledge about Krishna's divinity in Braj, but also, as you mentioned, Mahaprabhu's identity as Krishna himself. So that's also there. But also we find, and Mahaprabhu's especially in the Bhoma Lila, because also sometimes there is some difference in the Prakat Lila and the Aprakat Lila. For example, with things like Mahaprabhu's sannyas in the Prakat Lila, that brings about an extra sense of Aishvarya, because of course he's sannyasi. Sannyasi means renunciation. Renunciation implies some form of, that's one of the opulences of Bhagavan. The 6 opulences is full renunciation and knowledge and traveling and converting people and preaching. There are many elements of Aishvarya there, but again, as Guru Maharaj will say, this mainly has to do with the Madhya Lila of Sri Chaitanya, the preaching Lila, the Acharya Lila, which tries to take us, in one sense, to the Gambhira, to the inner life that Mahaprabhu showed in the Gambhira, and that will converge eventually in the Adi Lila, if you will, in the eternal Navadvip, where Mahaprabhu is not a sannyasi, he is Nimai, and everyone will serve him with a sense of intimacy, actually, and not of Aishvarya. He there will retain his name, Nimai Pandit, which Nimai is basically a nickname given in the village by apparently some so-called superstitious ladies that gave a name to be protected from evil spirits. So all that has mainly to do with the Madhurya aspect, the intimacy of the Nitya Lila in Navadvip. But again, in the context of his sannyas especially and traveling, there is some Aishvarya, but also, as you mentioned, in that Aishvarya, we may see at times a type of bewilderment. And of course, when speaking about the Gaur Lila, it's a different Lila. Bhagavan is in a particular disposition, as you know, he's already bewildered. I mean, for Krishna to appear as Gaur, there's bewilderment there, because it's Krishna being bewildered by the degree of Radha's love and wanted to have an experience of that. And in his attempt of experiencing a type of bewilderment, that he forgets that he is Krishna, and he enters into Radha's mood. So we may say that's a type of bewilderment. He's not aware that he's God, that he's Krishna. And that's why he went to Vrindavan only once in his Leela, and he only stayed for a few days, because he was in Vrindavan and he was Krishna in the mood of Radha, absorbed in Krishna, but in Vrindavan. So the particular mood of Vrindavan made Krishna, for example, there's one pastime with Mahaprabhu is in Imlitala meditating, being Krishna, in the mood of Radha, meditating in Krishna, and his whole luster became like Krishna. Mahaprabhu has the luster of Radha, but absorbed in the mood of Radha, meditating in Krishna, he acquired the mood of the hue of Krishna, and he was reminded, oh, I'm Krishna. No, somehow or other he connected that, oh, I'm Krishna. So he said, no, this is not good for my project. So he didn't stay too much in Vrindavan because of that, and he went back again to Jagannath Puri, the Vipralambha Kshetra, the field of culturing separation. So in one sense, we could say Mahaprabhu he's mostly in Bhakta Bhav, in the mood of a devotee. So we could say mostly in his Prakat Leela, he's exhibiting a type of bewilderment, because he's not generally aware I'm God, even though he at times showed his Aishwarya, like in the Chaitanya Bhagavad, they describe the Mahaprakash Leela. Mahaprabhu is showing for 21 hours in a row he sits himself in the altar and shows his different forms of Bhagavan. To Murari Gupta, he shows himself as Hanuman, and to different devotees according to their bhav, he shows himself as this, and different avatars like Nrsimha, Varaha. So he was there in full Aishwarya mode, if you will. But generally speaking, the dynamics in Gaur Lila are that he will be Krishna bewildered, if you will, by the love of Sri Radha, and mainly identify with that, instead of thinking, I'm Krishna, or even I'm God. The type of bewilderment in Gaur Lila will be, I want to taste Radha Bhav. But again, on occasions, we see different instances in the Leelas, also according to different devotees. Mahaprabhu may at times show some Aishwarya, like the one he showed to Sarvabhauma in the form of the Chaturbhuj, for example, and so on. Ramananda had a darshan of Krishna being Radha and Krishna combined, and so on. So again, in Gaur Lila, it's the same Krishna Lila, but at the same time it's different from it, and presenting some particular interesting dynamics in connection to how these two principles of Aishwarya and Madhurya interact in the context of the Audarya of the Gaur Lila. So some ideas regarding that. Thank you for your question, and I don't know if anyone else has any other question before finishing today. Okay, so I think we can finish here today. So thank you very much to all of you for your time, patience, and contribution, and see you next Thursday for our next section of the Raga-vartma-candrika. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Gaur Radha Madhav ki jai, Tiruvab Mahotsav Shri Haridas Thakur ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Pramanand Haribo. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyaiva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.